everyone, welcome to our second video about DNA scientists and structure. In this one, we're going to focus on the scientists, and I want to let you look at this key piece of information. It's right over here. This is a journal article published on April 25th, 1953 in the journal Nature, which is a scientific journal, and this is published by Watson and Crick, and it shares their findings about the structure of DNA. But there is a much more complicated story to the discovery of the structure of DNA than this. So let's check it out. So first, we have a scientist who used X-ray crystallography, a special technique, to observe DNA. And this scientist hypothesized that DNA was a helix shape. His name was Linus Pauling. And Linus Pauling said, hey, I think DNA is a twisted shape. That means helix. But he was confused. He thought that it might be a triple helix with 3 backbones. And it turns out that DNA is just a double helix with 2 sugar phosphate backbones. So Pauling kind of got scientists on the right track. And he actually was an American scientist working in California. Interestingly, most of our other scientists that we'll talk about today are from Europe or living in Europe. And Linus Pauling was unable to get to Europe to work with them because this was the Cold War era and he was suspected of being communist. And so that's kind of an interesting storyline there, but he was working in the United States. He was publishing information and he said, hey, I think DNA might be a twisted shape, but I think it might be a triple helix. And that was the part that was wrong. It's actually a double helix. So that's Linus Pauling. Next up, there's a scientist who discovered that there was the same amount of A, or adenine, as there is T, or thymine, in a cell. And there's the same amount of C, cytosine, as there is G, guanine, in a cell. And so, maybe those two pair up. If there's the same amount of A as T, maybe A and T will link together somehow. And if there's the same amount of G as C in every cell, that C and G might somehow link together. And that scientist's name was Irwin Schwartz. Irwin Schwartz contributed to us that A goes with T and G goes with C. But he didn't really do much research into the sugar phosphate backbone, and he didn't really put those ideas together. But he had published this information that, hey, it's the same amount of A as T, the same amount of G as C. And then other scientists were kind of like, well, that must mean they pair together. So that's Irwin Schwartz. Next up, and this is one of my favorite scientists of all times, is a scientist who provided a clear X-ray crystallography image of DNA. So you might remember that's the same technique that Linus Pauling was using. That was called X-ray crystallography, where you shoot an X-ray beam into a piece of DNA and you are able to actually kind of see the shape. But this scientist who looked at that clear X-ray crystallography image spent hundreds of hours taking these images and was able to find a perfect, beautiful shot of DNA. And that scientist is Roslyn Franklin. She's one of the few female scientists that we get to cover in this class. And she had to fight a lot of kind of adversity with the fact that she was a female doing work in the 50s and 60s, and that was not a very popular thing at the time. And so she faced a lot of gender discrimination, but she was the one who captured this fantastic image of DNA that really helps scientists understand that it is a double helix. Now, Roslyn Franklin was working in the same lab as our next scientist. And our next scientist worked with DNA imaging techniques like X-ray crystallography. And unfortunately, he actually shared Roslyn Franklin's X-ray crystallography image with Watson and Crick against her will or without her permission. And that guy, his name was Maurice Wilkins. So here he is working with an X-ray crystallography machine. And Maurice Wilkins was working in the same lab as Roslyn Franklin, and ideally they should have been partners, but he did not treat her with the respect that she deserved because she was a woman. He treated her as an assistant, and then he took her work, her beautiful picture of DNA, and shared it with other scientists without her permission, which is not okay. But this did end up leading to the Watson and Crick article about the structure of DNA. So Watson and Crick are our final scientists. James Watson and Francis Crick were kind of an unlikely duo. Watson was from the States and went over, and Crick was in Europe, and they worked together. And they actually used metal models to build a structure of DNA. They put together all of the ideas of the other scientists that I talked to you about and really figured out this structure of DNA. So they put together the idea that DNA was a helix shape, which Pauling and Franklin and Wilkins had contributed, and that A goes with T and G goes with C, which comes from Chargaff's ideas, and that they're held together by a sugar phosphate backbone. So Watson and Crick typically receive the most credit for discovering the structure of DNA, and they're the ones who published that article in the journal Nature, but they could not have done that without the contributions of other scientists like Linus Pauling, Irwin Schwartz, especially Roslyn Franklin. That picture of the DNA was critical in determining this double helix shape, and Maurice Wilkins as well. So Watson and Crick combined all the knowledge of these other scientists and really put together the structure of DNA, published the article, and Watson, Crick, and actually Maurice Wilkins were awarded the Nobel Prize for their discovery. And unfortunately, Roslyn Franklin was not included in the Nobel Prize because she unfortunately died of cancer prior to the awarding of that Nobel Prize. And you cannot receive a Nobel Prize if you have already passed away, unfortunately. And that X-ray crystallography did end up leading to her cancer and did end up leading to her death. So sadly, she did not receive recognition for her work during her lifetime, but now we have actually gone back and recognized Franklin's contributions. So thank you so much for listening about these DNA scientists. And if you would like, you may take a look in Canvas. I will have this image posted, and it really provides a great summary of the DNA scientist, the structure of DNA, and what we know about this very important molecule to life that pretty much gives instructions for our cells. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.